Top story on ABC News Breakfast, a chat is how Julia Gillard describes her meeting with News Limited editors in Sydney last night. But the Prime Minister isn't giving anything else away. The meeting was instigated by News Limited boss John Hartigan and comes amid a backdrop of months of tension between the company and the government.
Senior ministers have attacked News Limited newspapers, accusing them of having it in for the government. And Ms Gillard rubbed salt into the wounds when she said the organisation had some hard questions to answer in the wake of Britain's phone hacking scandal. For more, Andrew Green joins us now from Canberra. And Andrew, this would have been a fun little gathering, wouldn't it?
I don't know about you, Michael, but have you ever been to a really awkward dinner party where the people don't quite get along very well and you don't know what to talk about? Well, I suspect this would have been a little bit awkward last night. The Prime Minister's office isn't saying officially what they talked about or whether she read the riot act to the News Limited editors gathered there. All the PM's office is saying is that the Prime Minister discussed the government's reform agenda, but the context of this meeting is very interesting. It's not unusual, as Julia Gillard points out, for a Prime Minister to address a gathering of News Limited executives. It happens every now and again, but the context for this meeting is very, very different. Having a few weeks ago suggested that sections of the media stop writing crap, and then saying that she was but possibly inclined to agree with the Greens and have an inquiry into the Australian media. So those things we can expect were discussed. Also, News Limited's campaign against privacy and that sort of thing would also perhaps have got a good airing last night, but certainly it comes at a tense time for the Gillard government and News Limited. There has been, according to some ministers, a campaign being waged against Labor and some of its policies. So this meeting would have been covering quite a few awkward topics. Having said that, this is what the Prime Minister had to say earlier before she went into that meeting when she was asked about it at a press conference in Canberra.
I was invited to do so by John Hartigan, who brought his editors across the group together, as I understand they periodically do. Such meetings have been addressed by Prime Ministers and opposition leaders in the past. So when I was invited by Mr Hartigan, I accepted the invitation. It's a private meeting, but you would expect me to be talking about the government's reform agenda and my vision for the nation's future.
Prime Minister there. OK, Andrew, the meeting's been held, and looking at the News Limited papers this morning, have you noticed any change in their editorial tone?
No, but having said that, certainly on some of their tabloid front pages, there's not the headlines that the government have been bristling at recent times. Having said that, you can expect that this tense relationship will continue despite this one-off meeting with the Prime Minister. There are a number of differences in opinion on things like the carbon tax and certainly privacy law in Australia. The Prime Minister, after she left that meeting, just all she would say, as we've mentioned, is that they had a chat. So it'll be interesting to watch that space. Also, with the manoeuvrings in Parliament, with the Greens having suggested an inquiry that that party suggests could even help break up the News Limited empire in Australia. Well, the government has said that it's inclined to perhaps agree with having the inquiry. Whether that leads to any substantial changes to News Limited's operations in Australia, that's less likely. But of course there are also the contentious issues of privacy law reform that the government has touted in recent times following the news of the world hacking scandal in the UK, and the Prime Minister has in the past suggested that the public do perhaps have some hard questions for News Limited. Whether those specific allegations were put to the News Limited editors last night, we don't know yet.
And just quickly before you go, Andrew, the Prime Minister has yet another difficult engagement today.
She does, and this is something that a few people have questioned the Julia Gillard for doing. She's a number of weeks ago agreed to launch the book of former Victorian Police Commissioner Christine Nixon. Now, there is another News Limited link here because Christine Nixon has also suggested that News Limited were very much responsible in part for her downfall. Well, the Prime Minister has agreed to launch Christine Nixon's biography today in Melbourne, and Christine Nixon Nixon a week ago suggested that she would understand if the Prime Minister decided to pull out of this engagement. Well, Julia Gillard hasn't done that, and that launch will happen later in Melbourne at about 10:30 this morning.
Terrific. Andrew Green in Canberra, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.